the number of VC investments is actually declining?
Do you also see waves in this market that you see when the economy is slightly down?
Too much money in a company has never been good.
Pivot that, in my opinion, everything revolves around at the moment.
Guys, welcome. Great to have you watching again this week. This week, once again, with our trusted team, Marc Soons from Mr. Cashflow. He has written a great book and built a wonderful community around investing and ensuring financial progress. But yes, there are also some other aspects involved. Marc Wesselink. I often call him our startup king, but I've already understood he has many more nicknames. So those might come up at some point. Derk van Dam, a lawyer from Rotterdam, and myself, of course, Rowan Rozemond. Always busy with Derk, setting up funds and also at DHF. So let's just get started. And a lot has happened again this week, a turbulent week. Of course, we're right on top of it. Jakarta has published a report for the fourth quarter of 2024 about the venture capitalist market. Quite a bit is mentioned in it, including, of course, that the number of VC investments is actually declining.
Yes, we can say it's dropping significantly, and this is still on a global scale. Global figures, and if you also look at Europe, it's even more substantial. We've also seen in the Netherlands that a number of VC funds are stopping, and that naturally contradicts the policy, especially of the Netherlands and Europe, that we need more innovation. You see that the old venture capital way no longer works. So it really needs to be changed to a more deliberate and hands-on approach. In the industry, this is called a venture studio, which actually acts as an operating company alongside the ventures and also takes a much more active role. Instead of just the Monaco model, the spray and pray approach, I invest money in 20 companies and statistically, one of them does really well. 4 perform moderately, and I write off the remaining 16 because that's still the model we use. And it's really absurd that we still adhere to that. That might work in Silicon Valley, which is an extremely well-developed ecosystem of pre-seed, early and growth, venture capital, and angels. But we don't have that in Europe. So we really need to change the model, and this is essentially the statement.
Is this also your explanation for why Europe is lagging in this area?
Yes, by far. As I've mentioned before, most European VCs are almost all led by former bankers and lawyers. Well, with all due respect to you, but that is not the most innovative target group in the world. And in America, that's only 35%, 65% of American VCs are run by former tech entrepreneurs. So you often end up with a conviction model, with the founders believe in the founders, and then we will do everything possible to help them succeed. It's a completely different model than the Monaco model.
Yes. And Marc, do you also see waves in this market that you see when the economy is slightly down? Are these the signs that in the coming years it will be somewhat less favorable in the market on a broader scale?
Well, the venture capital industry is, of course, not hundreds of years old, so we don't have that much data, but we do have data on the well-known internet boom. That is still by far the peak in the entire venture capital market with the deployed capital. And of course, we have seen a peak before or after 2000, 2011, 2012, and a peak in 2022. The point of this article is that the core of the venture capital model is actually outdated. The spray and pray approach, pouring tens, if not hundreds of millions into growth, essentially just creating plofkippen, as I always call it. And we launch them onto the stock market. And what happens on the stock market? The entire stock market value evaporates. If you look at what has happened in America over the past 5 years, stock listings from companies long financed by venture capital, it's actually shocking. And the funny thing is that institutional investors and consumers bear the cost of it. And those who are very happy with it, of course, are the fund managers who receive a carried interest the moment it goes public, and they fly around happily with zero risk because they did it with other people's money and they are flying around happily. And of course, they are popular because they have an incredibly good return on investment for investors, but not in the long term.
But Marc, I see that too. In that respect, this is another phase of consolidation. And soon, to answer your question, I do think there is a cyclical element to it. We really had such a boom of VC funds in 2021. If you also look at that report, you now see that the number is indeed decreasing significantly. If you then look further, the size of each LP increases. So then the number of LPs. So you really see that indeed the type of investor is moving away more, but the ticket size is growing. That is interesting. So that is consolidation. And yes, the number of LPs, as these charts show again, is really increasing and consolidating. And I actually find that a very interesting fact, because it also shows, in my opinion, that this is more the market I would want to invest in then the 2021 market, follow the crowd, locked in, never out really. Because that is often the situation. It is precisely these kinds of moments when you find value. That is, of course, how our economy works. If you run after a crowd at a high peak, you earn nothing. It is precisely those moments when you are stuck in the mud and you are going off the beaten path. Then you earn, of course, then you make money. So I find it a very interesting time for venture. I might be completely gone off the beaten path, but that is how I have earned my stripes, by simply looking at what is possible in that sector. And then Wesselink, I am completely on board with your vision, which is that you need to approach it differently. That doesn't mean, because even cyclicals don't work in such a way that when a cycle ends, you should just do the same thing again. You need to look at all the other factors that exist nowadays. AI, the implementation of new power blocks such as Asia and America, and how Europe is dealing with matters. So, of course, you have to take all of them into account. And it is often said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And yes, that is exactly the same in this case.
Especially the whole AI, the rise of AI makes it possible to get to the market even faster and build software even quicker, almost without the intervention of programmers. And then you get what we all think we have an experience with programmers who ultimately built something fantastic, but totally unusable. And now is the opportunity is now much less because you can literally and figuratively talk to a prompt. And that prompt translates it into a concept in wireframes. And you can immediately take that to the farmer. 20 years ago, you needed programmers for that. 5 years ago, you needed designers for that, but now you can just do it yourself. And you simply have no translation loss between what you want and what is made. So we are also fully engaged in how we can use AI, and particularly the concept at the beginning for that.
Exciting times. Looking at that data in principle, and I think it's very important, small funds perform better than the masses. It's exactly the same element again. You shouldn't follow the crowd. You should look at the smaller funds that do something very specific and specialized. Yes, that's it. Then you'll find it nice there, because if you indeed look at the performance of those funds over the past period, you'll see that in 2023 it varies so much compared to earlier. Indeed, between 2017, between a 5 and 26% return, that is really very different from where we are now. So you can still find alpha. There are just too many managers.
And a few very large ones that just deploy. Yes, I don't think that's it either. That's what AVRF also says. Too much money in a company has never been good.
No, because then they worry about what they can buy and not about how they can generate revenue.
That's true. How does all this relate to the theme we discussed last week? The announcement by both the European and Dutch governments to allocate a significant amount of money for the defense industry. And then, in so many words, both the EU and the Commission, as well as the Dutch government, stated that there will be a stronger focus on seeking venture capital, private investors.
Yes, interesting that you mentioned that, Derek, because now the biggest dilemma is that on the left side, as you can see in the overview of Jakarta, you have different LPs in a fund. Mind you, the largest concentration of NADL funds, I find in Europe, NADL funds are 50 million. Yes, so those 50 million funds are almost all European funds, and I always call them small mom and pop funds. And then they don't work either because they are small to have a certain focus. So that's why we think 250 million is a good amount. So you already need more LPs here. But now it comes the family officers of Europe who want sustainable development goals. Not that you invest in weapons, not that you invest in defense. And on the right side, you suddenly have here a semi-government or a government that says we need to invest in defense. So you can no longer invest in defense according to the guidelines of the SDG/the FSD9, which I believe is entirely focused on impact.
The government itself says that the ESG rules should be interpreted less strictly, if I read it correctly.
Correct. But if you have LPs in your fund and 1 or 2 LPs come from the government, semi or European, who say we are going to invest in defense, how do you fill the rest of the fund with family offices that say, no, it's not allowed? Enjoy the match.
The macroeconomic issue is, in America under Biden, we've really seen a sort of lockdown of the IPO market, of stock market launches, very few mergers and acquisitions under the guise of creating monopolies. There's certainly something to be said about that. I also think that both among Democrats and Republicans, there is support for example, breaking up Google, breaking up Meta, creating spin-offs into smaller enterprises. YouTube could very well be its own company, so from that perspective, I understand it. We really have very large enterprises, but as an LP in a fund, you must have the opportunity to reach a liquidity moment to ensure you have cash again to do new things. And if you look now at the time it takes for a company to go to IPO or to merge or be acquired, it's so stretched, it's so long that there's no new money either, is to invest in something afterwards. And I think that leads to a larger ticket. Because those Saudi parties, you name it, yes, fine, oil sold. we need to invest in something, we are going to do something. So those big tickets will keep coming, they might even grow. And percentage-wise, that naturally increases quickly if you keep writing the big tickets. In my opinion, that is the main reason why you cannot continue with that economy. And the politics don't really look at that, because they don't look at, okay, wait a minute, what is the flow of that capital? Moreover, the European Central Bank, but also the American Bank, are actually ensuring that there is less liquidity in the market. Of course. Now, last week we talked about how Switzerland is ensuring that with interest rate cuts, there's a bit more juice in the system again, so to speak, that it runs just a bit more smoothly, which also has its negative effect. But if we look at this market, you need to ensure that an LP can return to a liquidity moment, that they can sell, that they can merge, that they can acquire other companies.
If that market isn't healthy, we've also noticed with some larger ticket investors, my entire physical allocation is still tied up. That's the answer. And then it becomes a very difficult story to create new funds. But well, let alone funds that are also focused on defense, almost impossible.
Yes, yes. I also hear it in practice that fund managers and others say, yes, we have quite interested parties, but they are not liquid. Everything is tied up. They can't do anything with it, so those investments don't get released. So everything indeed remains stuck. That's what you're saying.
A large part is commitments. So at the moment you traditionally invest in a venture fund, you make a commitment. That doesn't mean you transfer that money yet. Many people don't understand this. But at the moment you sign up for a venture fund, you're essentially telling the manager that when you need my money, you can call it up. But you actually commit. And it can take a year. It can take 2 years before that manager calls it up.
The 5 + 5 + 2 funds. So you have 5 years of capital deployment. Some take 3 years, but a maximum of 5 years. And then indeed, over a period of 5 years, you have various so-called capital calls. And then your bank account will also have an interest rate of 0.0% to 1% for a period of 5 years. And then it finally gets deployed. And that's why we've been strong proponents of evergreen structures from the start. But of course, we get a lot of those LPs run by former bankers and lawyers who think evergreen, I don't know it, I don't want it, I won't do it, while it's the best solution for everyone.
We see that again in the funds. Once that investor wants a liquid product because they have committed.
In terms of venture capital, an evergreen is unique. Hardly anyone does that. And of course, with real estate rides, but also with FX, it is naturally used much more frequently. But in the venture industry, a closed norm.
Yes, and I think that's also the case, but there's something else in it too, Wesselink. If you have an evergreen, then your result is over every period. Often what people forget with a traditional VC investment is that they only start measuring how much return they make from the moment they call your capital. Well, actually, from the moment it is in their account, and some even from the moment they actually deploy it, which can also take another 2 or 3 months. So they only calculate very efficiently from, okay, I have a commitment now, 2 years, 3 years, I do nothing with it. I don't calculate any return for it, while actually it's 0. Because you have committed, okay, you can put your money somewhere else. And then they only calculate from the moment they are in that venture until exit.
Thus, if you take this number from Carta into account, Rohan, you end up with an IRR of about 11 to 14%, and you could just as well offload it on the stock market.
Correct. Is therefore partly an explanation for the break on that development, I assume.
The longer it is fixed, the slower it is deployed, the lower your real IRR is. But that is not taken into account at all. So these figures all come from the moment of deployment and that's how we get the return on it. But that doesn't take into account that when someone has a commitment, they've left their money in such an account for 3 years at a lower interest rate because it needs to remain liquid.
But so that's an item that personally interests me quite a bit. Those defense funds that the government is currently working on, they will then, A, that it might be a challenge to get them filled, but B, they will have to be designed in a very attractive way, it seems to me. Yes, I feel that all of that.
I know I want to have created a completely different way to facilitate that. And of course, I've also talked with NATO funds and also with InvestNL. Only this is just really too new for them because this provides, yes, our model provides them with the solution. Feel free to call me as my number is known to them.
Often have a lower multiple than truly innovation-driven companies. And of course, many investors already have a stake in such a platform or there are many users. So I find it a very interesting development. I really hope, and I actually think, if we look ahead, that we will see many more IPOs in the Trump era. For that, the interest rate climate will need to stabilize. Yes, I do think we are now entering a period of, as we talk about that cycle of offloading and taking your losses also in traditional venture. Yes, those somewhat smaller funds, which we just talked about, will perform better, have performed better, more specialized, more specific than the billion-dollar funds. And yes, then I think we will eventually reach a point where we will experience another peak in the number of funds. But I think you're in a very good position now. At the forefront, you are one of the first in the value that is now being created, and it would be the same in defense. So I do think it will be very challenging to raise money for defense, but those who get involved will have a very promising journey ahead.
Certainly with a comprehensive approach. I realize that this may not correspond with the prevailing opinions of ISG and similar entities, yet the value of these investments in terms of making Europe self-sufficient, particularly in military aspects, is something I believe everyone can agree on.
Well, every entrepreneur makes an impact because they create jobs.
Yes. It also depends on what we, and Rowan and I, often hear on our travels outside Europe, which is that Europe is a museum. We've already discussed this extensively in this podcast. You can certainly debate that, of course. And if that's the case, it's a very beautiful museum. But if you want to position yourself as a bloc, as a group of countries, seriously on the world stage, then you must also be able to assert yourself militarily here, and at least be able to keep yourself safe and withstand any external threats.
Yes, I read in the FD that the European army is larger than any other army. If you add everything up, Turkey, Poland, France, England, that's quite funny to see again.
But yes, that ties into the discussions, of course. 500 million Europeans, more or less, 350 million Americans, 150 million Russians, and we ask America to protect us from Russia.
Yes, isn't that strange? But still a little bit, getting used to a Europe. In the past, we only had wars among ourselves. For 75 years now, we've been very kind to each other, and maybe it's time to indeed act as one, because that was, of course, in the past. I'm from 20, and there was constant conflict with the Germans across the border. Now they speak Dutch, and we speak German. So I think we're heading there now. We just need to act as one.
There's no other way. Thing in Europe that other continents do not have. That is that we in Europe have allowed our borders to be established organically. In all other continents, they have been drawn fairly arbitrarily. This means that if you look at our countries, we don't really have much conflict about our internal borders. The reason is that groups tend to integrate well within the country. I mean, the French are indeed different from Finns and Turks. That's where my issue with the European army is. Best of luck with assembling those three into a platoon and then ensure they all take similar actions together. I understand it. There isn't much conflict in that. We've been at this for decades. And in America, if you look at, and then we are indeed really talking about internal geopolitics, that is where I notice further distribution. How do you say it? It's falling apart. California has a clear voice saying we might need to be our own state. Texas clearly expresses a desire to perhaps become its own state. It is not as well integrated as we assume. We look at America as one thing.
The gap is getting bigger now. I had a lady from New York on the phone yesterday. Mark, I really apologize for our behavior. This is not our president. And this is not the first time I've said so. I speak with many Americans, also co-invited, also founders. They keep saying sorry over and over. This is not our president.
He truly wants Greenland, but I thought J.D. Vance said he was going for enjoyment with his wife going along on a trip to Greenland. I can't leave her to go by herself. Hey guys, what's happening over there?
Suddenly, everyone is going to Greenland. I'm talking about, no, what was his name again? His son has also unexpectedly gone to Greenland for vacation. It's very good for the Greenlandic economy. I mean, if they really, one of the last nations I thought about, well, they are going to develop a significant tourism sector. However, Greenland is indeed constructing 3 airports to strengthen the tourism sector significantly. If you just look at it from their perspective, this is the best marketing. It's better than the marketing we had with the English, who said, don't visit Amsterdam, and yet everyone comes. It's like saying to Americans, we're going to purchase it, and they all come to check it out. From their perspective, it's great for the tourism industry.
Absolutely, that's right. Yet there are indeed factors like...
Yes, legally, country, that's not feasible. And that is, so it's all a bit for the neighbor. Technically, that would simply be considered an act of war against Demi. I had that last time too. He moves around a lot here. And then as a magician, he moves around a lot here. And then he's doing something different on the right side.
Is that also the case with those US tariffs on car sales, I think?
That's nice too. Yes, that's certainly true. We do have a little statistic for ups and downs regarding trade wars. I can almost foresee for you, especially towards America. And you always see that it is a period again because eventually they realize it's harmful to their own economy. And then it becomes time again. But at least they have a point. And yes, that's how it functions. And unfortunately, well, that's only a good thing. I think that's pretty good for the Netherlands too. I've also experienced the past. I have moved. I need new things. And I have deliberately sought out non-Chinese products. Or truly, it's nearly impossible. I just had I have a garden. I've always resided in an apartment right in the city. I now have a garden. I think I'm going electric with batteries. Purchase an electric saw and chainsaw that run on batteries. From Bosch, a German brand. Yes, imported by Robert Bosch, Germany, made in China. I should just go to him, God. But the last one was produced in Hungary. So I thought they made everything in Europe, but that's not true. So 80% of Bosch's goods are made in China too. Yes, I feel that we should be much more engaged with that. Regarding that, I found J.D. Vance's speech the day before yesterday at Andreessen Horowitz to be spot on. While I'm not a fan of him, he did point out that we've sent far too much production to impoverished nations. And now, in terms of design, it's designed in Germany, made in China, but now it's just designed in China and made in China. And the Turidoki as well. We have to watch out for that.
Yes, that's true, but it has been a very strange trend, and now, again, because it really marks an end to globalization in certain respects.
However, having everything that needs a plug manufactured in just one country is certainly not beneficial.
Well, I do agree with you. It's not good for our own Western industry, but all those companies must have had their reasons for doing it. Of course, it has indeed been the trend for a long time. You can see this reflected in various discussions about raw materials. China is indeed one of the pivot that, in my opinion, everything revolves around at the moment.
They simply have direct rail connections with Asia and Africa where they keep those raw materials. If you are now looking for a raw material for, let's say, an electric saw, yes, then China has already purchased that for the next 5 years. So if you want to produce an electric saw now, it's impossible to do that. It was there. Chinese components and raw materials.
And how does that relate, Mark, to the war rhetoric currently coming from America against China, especially regarding Taiwan? I've thought about that too. What if that actually happens? I'm not saying I know, but if China and Taiwan ignite, it could happen that way. The Chinese say, okay, guys, now you get nothing at all. At this moment, we collectively face a significant issue.
At least I already have my electric saw at home. This means I can at least saw down a tree. Indeed, that is a legitimate worry.
Yes, but it's a whole world. It won't happen quickly. We just discussed the rhetoric that comes from Washington. Isn't this also happening around Taiwan?
I didn't know. You are indeed dependent on each other to a certain extent. However, we need to regain some balance, I believe. That we can also produce goods in Poland, Hungary, and Europe. And that we also just use those and now fully reliant. I really have to search to see if I can even buy an article not made in China. That can't be good, can it?
It used to be that you could select based on price, but that's no longer the case. High-end products are also made in China. Low-end products are made in China. I mean, they have a massive production capacity. And we must not forget, those factories are not there just because of low labor costs. They are simply advised products. If you look at the BYD factory, to go back to the car example, that factory is larger than the largest mega factory or the biggest car factory elsewhere in the world. And, Dirk, regarding your point, it's a world full of incentives. Moreover, if you consider that article on tariffs, it's ridiculous how things are progressing. They travel from Canada to Mexico and then return to the US. That's how the world is set up. Vlogged, a tiny component comes from there, another small part comes from there. What Sorensen mentioned last time is that regions strengthen and improve in a specific area, specializing in a particular skill. And I really believe in that. You can definitely say everything is made in China, but right now, everything is made and assembled in China, designed in China. They are simply excellent at manufacturing those products. Where they are still lacking is in the service sector. Basically, everything else that is not related to production. Of course, it's not just one side of the coin. But now, the balance of power is indeed significantly shifted there.
Thus, you can observe that Europe is progressively moving towards the service sector, which I believe is a rather risky evolution in itself. Yes, so you are, I'll put it in my own words, and I'm part of it too, of course. But essentially, you are just circulating money within your own economy. Because in the service sector, you don't actually create anything.
Yes, especially with regard to AI. I believe many of those service roles will soon be taken over by agents, AI agents, so that will become an additional tool.
Wesley, you have a point there. In fact, we are currently at a fascinating juncture with AI, because AI will ensure that production becomes a service. Because if you can have robots build a complete product, then it's no longer production. Then it becomes a service, in fact. Because you let a specific agent robots build a certain product, you still had to align it with the product you were going to build. That won't be required anymore. It's just figure it out, robot, make this product. And AI is capable of doing that. We're transitioning to a different kind of factory, where I used to dream of that printer we have at home. In a moment, you'll be able to print parts from IKEA. You simply order them, and you can see that now too. However, the technology is still below standard. However, if you have a production facility, that simply says to make this product and AI figures out how to align their robots, then it has become a service.
Well, it won't have the authority. We are in the process of redesigning a website for one of our projects. We are actually having an AI agent do this, which observes a visitor's behavior on the website to see what they engage with and what they don't. And then on the back end, updates happen almost in real time based on the behavior of the user. Thus, you create a user feedback loop maintained by an AI agent, leading to a continually improving website, completely automated with no designer intervention.
Yes, but what Rowan is saying is that it will also apply to real physical products.
Sure. However, this is already an example in the software industry, which is a soft product. But if you can indeed make robotics work in the same way, then they have, so to speak, a curve with parts behind them. It states that I desire an electric saw. All those MacGyver pieces in one. Yes, I think that's still far off. We're in the middle of renovations. We are definitely adding more substance. And if you indeed combine that with a plastic casing that can be printed with a 3D printer in the hardest plastic you can imagine, then you essentially have a tailor-made saw in service.
What remains for the manufacturing sector in Western Europe and America? And to return to what I hear in America, but also in the Middle East, Europe is like a museum. That's true, because the workforce is large in 10 years, 20 years. Where will people still find employment is my question.
I believe particularly in business model innovation. I think we need to return to a pay-per-use model, a product as a service, as we mentioned earlier. And that actually is no longer your property, but remains the property of the product of the account, and therefore has the motivation to continue making and improving the best product and charges a monthly fee for this. And if something goes wrong, you send it in. You receive something new in the mail, and it gets completely refurbished and recycled at the back. This is what we call a circular economy. A circular economy is significantly better than a linear one. And if we, especially European manufacturers, embrace that model, I think we can gain a huge advantage over other industries. We'll see. We'll see. Yes.
You will own nothing and you will be happy. It's literally Klaus Schwab, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
I've been simplifying my life for years. I try to get rid of things except for an electric saw. If I had paid XYZ a month for that electric saw, I would have been perfectly okay with it. I'm fine with it as long as I can keep it up. Continue doing it and it gets serviced. Indeed, most electronic products are designed to last only 3 to 5 years at most.
No, I completely agree. The waste and the ever-growing mountains of trash, plastic waste in the oceans, awful, of course. The most famous bulb is, of course, the incandescent bulb.
Philips made an incandescent bulb. By the way, I don't think I had that made. Philips once created an incandescent bulb. It still works.
That's a business model. I saw a documentary about it years ago on a foreign channel. The inventor of that growth lamp, a Frenchman who created a lamp that could last forever, somewhere around 1890 or so, in the 19th century, was murdered. That would destroy the flying model of the growth lamp industry.
Dirk, this light bulb is still hanging in a fire station in New York. It has been lit continuously to this day, believe it or not.
Never yes, no LED can compete with that, let's just say.
But we will go another way. That's also much healthier for us as humans. It flickers a bit less, but then we focus on health tools. You'd be better off having a light bulb at home than an LED. Yes, it's a bit less economical.
Yes, that makes me think. You can use low voltages, so it's easy to fix, but it's another technological development, allowing companies like Signify to sell extra bulbs again.
Let's go back. That has been occupying my mind for a long time now. These developments you are outlining, Wesselink, I think you are right about that. However, this implies that the level of activity, particularly in the manufacturing sector, we just stated it should go back to Europe. Indeed, that would be wonderful. But it is becoming increasingly smaller in these scenarios. The population in Europe is continuously increasing. And how will those individuals find employment later on? Well, I really want to let loose.
I'm a big supporter of universal basic income. In Canada, they have done extensive research on basic income. In the 70s, they provided a very large report on basic income. You can see that the top demographic groups have made significant progress in wealth, education, and health. I truly believe that if we consider all the costs in the Netherlands alone, all the expenses related to monitoring whether someone receives benefits or not, by getting rid of all those evaluations, we would have sufficient money to provide that basic income. And basic income is different from welfare. This basic income is one that you can live on comfortably, not to purchase a Rolls Royce, but to live well, and then you can choose what you want. And there might also be a whole day of just being a little busy bee. Or yes, it is a model between communism and capitalism. I think that will lead to a far better society than what we currently possess. Yes, it remains interesting.
A really nice opinion, I think that it is often misread. This is particularly evident in the Netherlands, especially regarding the Klaus Schwab narrative. Everyone is just going to create doomsday scenarios based on his story. While I believe he is simply calling out several individual points that could be alarming when combined, there are several separate ideas that are quite good and would indeed positively impact our economy and welfare. We talked about it with startups. How amazing is it if you can provide people starting a startup with a basic income so they don't have to worry about it and can run harder in a company? Look, if you don't need to stress about paying the rent at the end of the month, your focus can be solely on innovation, creativity, and growth. And then you're less caught up in your own concerns. I recently talked about that with Mark. I think there is definitely something to say about that, leaving aside the venture capital and startup worlds. I observed that when basic needs are fulfilled, people tend to thrive more. In my book, I mentioned financial relaxation. This means the mortgage, car, transport, and food expenses. Indeed, being financially relaxed leads to a significant reduction in stress. With less stress, people tend to be more creative.
And that is simply much healthier, reduced crime rates.
It's a time to rise, indeed. To say no, this approach has also failed in the communist world. It takes away the incentives and the necessary drive for innovation because people lack the motivation to advance in life.
But they should read the book by that lady who wrote a whole book based on over 7,000 data points from people in Canada. The data indicates that Canada shares some cultural and economic similarities with us. And she described it fantastically because it is not communism. I totally agree, communism failed. But when someone does something similar to what we do with VentureRock, in the first year, giving an entrepreneur a basic income to focus on finding product market fit is part of our statement. And you can see that clearly, that those people think much more freely and become much more creative in finding solutions instead of constantly stressing about surviving and making ends meet. That is not for us, nor for anyone else, including entrepreneurs.
I believe the main distinction with communism is that you seize the potential benefits. You state, this is the limit of how far you can go, end of story. You don't do that with a basic income. You essentially say, this is the foundation, and you can still rise higher. You can still go as far as you want. This also connects nicely to the discussion we had last week, which is, at the moment, you also link a pension fund that invests in the economy you are in. Actually, maybe this is it, I'm thinking now. Perhaps we shouldn't move towards the whole local buying movement. It's being misinterpreted. That doesn't mean you have to go to the farmer to pick up your milk. This week, I talked to someone who literally spends the weekend slowly gathering food from farmers. That's not efficient enough. We'll all be in a traffic jam on a country lane. That simply doesn't work. But yes, we are just standing here. Are we all gathered together in the polder area?
With his program, Clarkson effectively dismantles entire rural communities as they all wait in a traffic jam to serve him, and to buy one of his sheep pastries. Awesome. That doesn't work either.
That doesn't work. There must be a certain scale advantage applied if you would want it to make that work in an economy. However, local investment and helping people who want to progress, I believe that's much more powerful, and actually adding equity locally to the community. Because very often, I also don't believe we live in a capitalist world. We exist in a monopolistic world where everything goes to the winner, and it shouldn't be that way. Capitalism is about distributing the best of the best, and if you combine capitalism with a basic income, I think you're really heading in a good direction. Only if you start combining monopolism. Yes, if you combine monopolism with a basic income, I think you're heading in the wrong direction.
Yes, I completely agree. It's just about keeping it a bit sweet, like sweet licorice sticks.
You will
Equitable
lean more
ownership.
towards communism with monopolism.
Well, we have been working on facilitating employee ownership and co-ownership with Startup World for a long time. What still exists is that when I give my employees a share, taxes must be paid right away. That makes no sense since the company must also continue. But taxes should only be paid when it is sold. We've been trying to simplify that for a long time. Well, in the Netherlands, we are almost there. Fortunately, Europe is also working on building a kind of uniform European Inc. where this is also possible. Yes, we need to move towards a more fair distribution of equity, but that often isn't possible because it's very difficult to incentivize an employee with shares or to sell to someone else. That remains incredibly difficult. We need to simplify this. Gentlemen, I need to leave now. It was a pleasure. Next time I will be a bit longer. I still had some appointments scheduled.
You until next time. Goodbye.
And perhaps we are also at the end of our podcast.
Yes, there is still so much to say about this, and I hope it comes back in a future rendition, the debate on basic income and a fundamentally different societal structure you are referring to.
And there is indeed a lot to be said for this. Yes, it's just an interesting discussion, as I know there are many opponents to it. But when I look at what we are trying to create, when I see why people read books like Cash Flow, it's because they want to generate a kind of basic income stream alongside their regular daily tasks and jobs, so they can find financial stability, so they can engage with their creativity, passion, and ambition. I do notice that, especially in the Netherlands, too many people are becoming paralyzed by all these rising prices. And having a basic income, whether it's through employment or as an entrepreneur, dominates a large part of your week. I believe that if we could have something for that, there is indeed something worth discussing.
That's an interesting idea, though it's certainly not a new one. I do have some questions about that, but we can discuss it in the next episode. However, I know there are thoughts on that matter that could involve pension funds and similar entities. There are all kinds of thoughts about that.
I have a great cliffhanger for you. In my view, it is eliminating payroll tax. Let's save that for next time. I enjoyed this discussion again. We really went deep this time. So thank you very much to everyone who watched. Did you find this engaging? Give the video a like and follow us. Then you'll also find out next week when we are live again with a new broadcast. Well, thank you very much and see you next time.